The morning sunlight glowed through my lace curtains, painting gold over the ivory gown hanging by the mirror. I'd spent months choosing that dress. Simple, elegant, just enough shimmer to catch the light when I turned. My makeup artist, Emily, hummed to a slow love song as she brushed color onto my cheeks. The scent of peonies filled the air. Everything felt warm, soft, perfect. It was the morning of my wedding. My name is Avery Collins, and I was supposed to marry Ethan Reed today in the small garden behind the Willow Creek Inn. I'd imagined this moment since I was a girl, walking down an aisle my father built with his own hands, my mother smiling from the front row, her pearls catching sunlight. But by noon, something began to feel wrong. The inn staff moved quietly, exchanging worried looks when they thought I wasn't watching. Emily checked her phone for updates, whispering with the wedding planner. My stomach fluttered, not with excitement, but a strange unease. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending not to notice how her eyes darted away. "Just the caterer's running late," she said, forcing a smile. I nodded, telling myself it was fine. People ran late all the time. My parents were probably making some grand entrance. They loved attention. Still, I kept checking my phone. Mom hadn't texted me all morning. Dad was supposed to pick up Ethan's parents from their hotel. No answer. My maid of honor, Lydia, finally came rushing in, her curls frizzed from the humidity. "They're not here yet?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not Mom, not Dad, not Ethan's side either. Maybe there's traffic." Lydia bit her lip. I tried calling Ethan. It goes straight to voicemail. A chill crept under my skin. Outside the dressing room window, the garden looked beautiful. Rows of white chairs, soft music playing from the speakers, petals scattered along the aisle. The breeze carried the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Everything looked ready, except there were no guests. I dialed Ethan again. 1 ring.
2.
Then voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just call me when you get this, okay?" My voice cracked at the end. Minutes turned to hours. The sky shifted from bright blue to a muted silver. The inn manager asked if I wanted to delay the ceremony. I nodded numbly. Emily packed up her brushes. Lydia tried to lighten the mood, making jokes that landed like stones. At 3 o'clock, I sat alone in my gown, staring at the half-melted cake through the open doorway. The frosting drooped. The sugar flowers began to collapse. A child passing by with his mother pointed and asked, "Mommy, why is that lady sitting all by herself?" The mother tugged him along before I could answer. By 4, I gave up pretending. I peeled off my veil and walked barefoot into the garden. The air was cool, but my skin felt hot. My reflection in the pond shimmered, a bride without a wedding. Lydia came out, holding her phone. Her eyes were wide. "Avery, your parents just posted something." My heart stuttered.
"What?"
She showed me the screen. A post from my mother's account. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding has been canceled. Please respect our privacy at this time." Canceled? I grabbed the phone. The post was real. Dozens of comments, people sending love and support, others asking if we were okay. My own parents had announced my wedding was canceled, while I was standing in the wedding dress. I felt dizzy. What does this mean? Lydia didn't know what to say. Neither did I. My mind raced. Had Ethan changed his mind? Did someone get hurt? Why hadn't anyone told me? I stared at the empty chairs, the untouched champagne, the petals fluttering under the wind like tiny pieces of paper promises. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. Just one line. "Sweetheart, the wedding's been canceled. Come home." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. The sunlight faded, leaving the garden in pale gray. Somewhere behind me, the music stopped. I whispered to no one. But it was supposed to be today. The words disappeared into the wind. The drive back to my parents' house felt endless. The seatbelt pressed against my chest like a reminder that I was still breathing, still moving, though I didn't want to. My wedding dress pulled around my feet, the hem gathering dust from the car floor. I didn't even bother to change. When I pulled into the driveway, their porch lights were already on. My mom, Patricia, opened the door before I could knock. Her expression wasn't grief or guilt. It was irritation, like I'd interrupted dinner. "Sweetheart," she said, too softly. "You shouldn't have come here dressed like that." I stared at her. "You told the world my wedding was canceled. You told me it was canceled." She glanced past me toward the street. "Lower your voice. The neighbors don't need a show." My father, Greg Collins, stood behind her with his arms crossed. "Avery, we did what had to be done." "What does that even mean?" My voice trembled. "Where's Ethan? What happened? Did he cancel?" Greg cut me off. "You wouldn't understand right now. You're emotional." Emotional. The word hit harder than a slap. Lydia had followed me, standing a few steps back, but my father shot her a look that said leave. She didn't. "Mr. Collins," she said carefully, "Ethan's family is confused. They were at the venue. They thought the ceremony was still happening." My mother's eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she sighed. "Lydia, I think it's best you go home. This is a family matter." But Lydia didn't move. "Avery deserves an explanation." "I deserve the truth," I whispered.
"Right now."
Greg exhaled through his nose, like I was a problem he needed to manage. "Your fiancé isn't who you think he is. We found things out. Private things." "What things?" "He's unstable," my mother said quickly. "He's not ready for marriage. Trust us. We saved you from a disaster." It didn't sound like truth. It sounded like control. I shook my head. "So you canceled my wedding? Without telling me?" Patricia reached out, her tone syrupy sweet. "Avery, you'll thank us one day." I stepped back. "No, I won't." The silence that followed was heavy. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hand dropped. Greg turned away. "You're overreacting. Go get some sleep. You'll feel differently in the morning." I almost laughed. The words were so familiar. "You're overreacting." The same phrase they'd used when I cried about missing art school, when I told them Ethan and I wanted to move out of state, when I asked them to stop controlling everything. Lydia slipped her hand into mine. "Come on. You shouldn't stay here tonight." My mother frowned. "Don't be dramatic, Avery. You have a home here." I looked around the house, the carefully polished furniture, the framed photos of smiling faces that never looked real. The same house where every dream I'd ever had was rewritten to fit their version of me. "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." I turned toward the door. Behind me, my father muttered, "Ungrateful." I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I just walked. Outside, the air felt colder than before, the kind that makes your breath visible. Lydia opened her car door, and we sat there for a moment in silence. The world looked strange. Too sharp, too bright. "You know this isn't your fault, right?" she said finally. "I don't know anything anymore," I whispered. She drove me back to her apartment. The streetlights blurred through my tears, turning everything into streaks of gold and gray. Inside, she handed me a blanket, but my hands were trembling too hard to hold it. On her coffee table sat a slice of the wedding cake she'd saved for later. Untouched, the frosting cracked, the edges dry. I stared at it until my eyes burned. "Do you ever feel like your life just stopped mid-sentence?" Lydia sat beside me. "All the time, but that's when you start writing the next one." Her words were kind, but they felt far away. I closed my eyes. Somewhere deep inside, something had gone quiet, not from peace, but from shock. When I finally fell asleep on her couch, I dreamed of the garden again. The empty chairs. The wind blowing petals over the aisle. My bouquet lying in the grass, half crushed. A child's voice echoed through the dream. "Why is that lady sitting all by herself?" Because her world was taken apart by the people who promised to protect her. When I woke the next morning on Lydia's couch, the city outside her window was gray and wet. Rain tapped the glass like tiny, insistent fingers. I sat up slowly, still in yesterday's makeup, the wedding dress now folded across a chair like the ghost of a life that never happened. Lydia was already up, making coffee. She handed me a mug and said, "You don't have to talk." Just sit. But the silence between us pulled at me until I finally did. I should have seen it coming, I said quietly. They've been doing this my whole life. It started small, or maybe that's just how control always starts. When I was 10, I wanted to join the art club. My mom said, art doesn't build a future. My dad said, be practical like your brother. They enrolled me in piano lessons instead. I didn't like piano, but I learned to smile and say I did. By 16, every decision came with strings. My curfew wasn't just about safety, it was about appearance. We don't want people talking, my mom would say. Good families stay home at decent hours. When I got my first job at a coffee shop, my dad made me quit after a week. You don't need to scrub tables, he'd said. You're Collins. I remember crying in my room that night, my sketchbook open on the floor. I had drawn a girl standing behind glass, her hands pressed against it, unable to step out. I guessed that girl was me. Years later, in college, I met Ethan Reed. He was everything my parents weren't: gentle, patient, steady. He listened. When I talked, he didn't interrupt. He asked questions. The first time I brought him home, my mother smiled too brightly, the kind of smile that meant she was already planning something. After dinner, she whispered, he seems nice, but don't rush. He's different. Different. That was her word for anyone she couldn't control. At first, they played along. They pretended to like him, even helped with the engagement. But there were cracks, small, hidden comments. My father once said, he doesn't have much saved, does he? My mom added, a man should be able to provide. You deserve better, Avery. They always disguised cruelty as care. When Ethan and I decided to have a small wedding, just friends, a few family members, simple and intimate, my mother called it a mistake. She wanted a ballroom, chandeliers, 200 guests. What will people think? She asked. I told her I didn't care what people thought. She looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. The weeks before the wedding were tense. She called every day, criticizing something: my dress too plain, the food too rustic, the music not formal enough. My father stayed quiet, but his silence was its own form of pressure. Then there was the rehearsal dinner. Ethan's parents flew in early. We'd booked a small restaurant, warm and cozy. Everyone was laughing until my mother raised a glass. To our daughter, she said sweetly. May she always remember that marriage is about respect and knowing her place. The laughter froze. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled to keep peace, but inside, I felt the old familiar shrinking. After that night, Ethan asked me, do they always talk to you like that? I said, it's just how they are. But that was the lie I'd told myself for years. It's just how they are. A few days before the wedding, Mom stopped answering my calls. She said she was busy with arrangements. Dad handled all the contracts and payments, insisting it was easier that way. I trusted them. I always did. Now, sitting in Lydia's kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, the pattern unfolded in my mind like a blueprint. Every step, every word, every boundary I thought I'd built, they'd been quietly moving the walls closer. They didn't ruin my wedding because they discovered something terrible. They ruined it because I had finally chosen something without their permission. Lydia broke my thoughts. You know, when my mom used to guilt-trip me, she'd always say, I just want what's best for you. Took me years to realize she meant, I want what's best for me. I nodded. That's exactly what my parents mean. I looked down at the chipped mug in my hands. They made me believe love and obedience were the same thing. Lydia's voice softened. But they're not. Love lets you grow. For the first time in my life, I believed her. The rain eased outside. I watched drops slide down the window like tiny lines of release. In the distance, a small bird hopped along the railing, shaking its wings. It was drenched, but still moving. I whispered, I think I'm finally starting to see them clearly. Lydia smiled faintly. Good. Because the next part, that's when you take your life back. I didn't know how yet. But the thought of it, of standing on my own without flinching, was the first thing in days that didn't feel impossible. 3 days passed in a blur of unanswered questions. I hadn't gone home. I hadn't changed my phone number, but I'd stopped looking at it every few minutes like I used to. The silence from my parents was deafening, the kind of silence that feels deliberate. Lydia went back to work, but she checked in constantly. She'd leave sandwiches on the table and gentle reminders to drink water. I stayed mostly on her couch, staring at the wedding dress still hanging over the chair. The fabric looked heavy now, like it carried every lie ever told to me. On the morning of the third day, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Is this Avery Collins? The voice was female, cautious, polite. Yes. This is Rachel Reed, Ethan's sister. My heart stopped. Rachel. There was a pause on the line, full of confusion. I've been trying to reach you since Saturday. Ethan's been devastated. He thought you ran away. I sat up. What are you talking about? My parents said the wedding was canceled. Rachel's tone hardened. Canceled? The venue was decorated. Guests were seated. Ethan was waiting for you. We waited 2 hours. The room spun. No, I whispered. That can't be right. I have pictures, Avery, she said softly. I didn't want to show them, but I think you need to see. A text notification blinked on my screen. My breath caught. There it was, my wedding venue. The flowers, the archway, the aisle lined with candles. Ethan stood there in a suit, hands clasped, eyes red. The caption beneath the photo from Rachel, he thought you weren't coming. My whole body went cold. They told me it was canceled. I said, almost to myself. They told me to come home. Rachel's voice cracked. Avery, they told us you had cold feet, that you left him. My throat closed. They lied to everyone. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of the city outside felt too loud, the refrigerator too sharp, every sound wrong. Rachel broke the silence. Ethan doesn't know what to think. He's been blaming himself. I just thought you should know the truth. Thank you, I whispered, but it came out broken. When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in Lydia's window. Pale skin, messy hair, eyes that didn't look like mine. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, rehearsing that calm tone she always used when she lied. Sweetheart, the wedding's been canceled. Come home. She'd said it like she was protecting me. But really, she was protecting her control. Lydia came home an hour later and found me still sitting there, the phone trembling in my hand. What happened? I told her everything. Rachel's call, the photos, the lies. Her eyes widened with fury. They sabotaged your wedding. They destroyed it, I said flatly. They didn't want me to have a life that didn't orbit around them. Lydia sat across from me, silent for a long moment. Then she said, So what are you going to do? The question sat heavy between us. I didn't know yet. Every instinct told me to curl up and disappear, to let time pass until the ache dulled. That's what I'd always done. But something inside me refused to stay quiet this time. I remembered all the small betrayals, the piano lessons, the job they made me quit, the engagement dinner toast that wasn't really a blessing. Every act of love from them had come with a condition. Every kindness had been a chain. And now they'd gone too far. I stood up, feeling the tremor in my knees but refusing to sit back down. I'm going to talk to them, I said. Lydia frowned. Are you sure? Yes. My voice steadied. Not to yell. Not to beg. Just to tell them they don't get to rewrite my life again. The rain outside had stopped. The world looked washed clean, empty streets, sunlight breaking through clouds. I changed into jeans and a gray sweater, tying my hair back. My reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, but stronger somehow. For years, I'd waited for permission for them to approve, to accept, to say yes. But they'd taken enough. I didn't owe them another apology. As I grabbed my keys, Lydia said quietly, You're shaking. I know, I said, but I'm not scared anymore. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and pine. The air was cool, alive. My hands still trembled, but this time it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, because I finally understood. They'd never change. But I could. The drive to my parents' house felt different this time. I wasn't shaking from fear. I was steady, alert, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. Every mile that passed was a piece of the old me fading away. By the time I turned onto Maplewood Drive, the sun had started to set, painting the sky in gold and ash. The same house I'd grown up in came into view. The white porch, the manicured lawn, the fake warmth that had fooled everyone for decades. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I thought about walking away, pretending none of it mattered. But that's what I'd done all my life. Swallowed the truth, smiled through the pain. Let them win quietly. Not this time. When I rang the doorbell, my mother answered, still in her apron, like nothing had ever happened. "Avery," she said with that practiced calm. "You look pale. Come in, sweetheart." Her tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't affection. It was ownership. "I'm not staying," I said, stepping past her before she could object. My father was in the living room, sitting in his armchair, reading the newspaper like he hadn't blown up my entire life. He lowered it slowly. "You came back. I came to tell you both something." Patricia closed the door behind me. "Honey, whatever this is." "Don't." I cut in. "Just listen." Their eyes met, that silent exchange they always had when they wanted to stay in control. I ignored it. "You lied," I said. "You lied to me, to Ethan, to everyone." Greg set the paper aside. "We did what we thought was best." "Best for who?" "For me." I took a step forward. "You told him I got cold feet. You humiliated me in front of everyone I love." Patricia's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed smooth. "Avery, you've always been impulsive. We needed to protect you from a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean my choice." Silence stretched between us. My heartbeat filled the space. "For once," I said quietly, "I'm not going to explain why what you did was wrong. You already know. You've always known." My mother's smile faltered. "We're your parents. You owe us respect." I met her eyes. "No. Respect is earned. And you lost mine the day you decided your control was more important than my happiness." Greg stood, his expression darkening. "Watch your tone." I held his gaze, unflinching. "You don't scare me anymore." Something shifted in the room, a crack in their armor, a flicker of uncertainty. They weren't used to this version of me. I pulled a small envelope from my bag and placed it on the table. "That's my new address. And before you say anything, no, it's not an invitation. It's a boundary. I'm moving out of Lydia's place tomorrow. I'll let you know when if I want contact." Patricia's hand trembled slightly. "You can't just cut us off." "I can," I said softly. "And I am." Greg took a step closer. "You're overreacting again. You always." I cut him off. "Stop saying that. Stop acting like my feelings are the problem when your actions are. You ruined something beautiful because you couldn't stand not being in control." His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he didn't have a quick answer. Patricia's voice cracked. "We only wanted what was best for you." I looked at her, really looked, and saw it clearly for the first time. She wasn't sorry. She was scared. Scared of losing the version of me she could manage. "I know," I said finally. "But you don't get to decide what that is anymore." I turned toward the door. My father muttered something under his breath, but I didn't stop. The evening air hit me like a baptism. Cool, clean, real. The porch light flickered above me, and for a moment I thought I might cry. But I didn't. When I reached my car, I saw my reflection in the window, tired eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, but a faint smile. Not because I was happy, because I was free. I sat in the driver's seat, letting the moment settle. The silence felt different now, not suffocating, but peaceful. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Ethan, Rachel told me what happened. I never stopped loving you. Can we talk?" My breath caught. For the first time in days, hope didn't feel dangerous. I didn't reply, "Not yet." Some things take time to heal. But I smiled, knowing I finally had the right to choose when and how that healing would begin. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the house. The windows glowed behind me, two silhouettes standing in the doorway, smaller than I'd ever seen them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being left behind. The next morning, I woke to the sound of pounding at Lydia's apartment door. My heart jumped, a dull ache mixing with adrenaline. I opened it to find my father, Greg, and my mother, Patricia, standing there, umbrellas dripping rainwater onto the doormat. Their expressions were a mix of anger and disbelief, their perfectly tailored clothes soaked but unbothered. "Avery," my mother called. "You can't just disappear like this." I stepped back, my hands trembling slightly. I didn't disappear. I chose not to be controlled anymore. Greg's jaw tightened. "You're ruining the family's reputation. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what you've done," I said calmly. "And it's not my responsibility anymore." They exchanged a look, the familiar silent code, as if my defiance was a crime they'd never expected to witness. "You don't understand," Patricia said, her voice rising. "We were only protecting you. Everyone was concerned. The wedding, your engagement, everything." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "You lied to Ethan, humiliated me, and pretended it was for my own good. That's not protection. That's manipulation." Greg moved closer, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think you can just walk away from your family?" "Yes." I stood taller. "I am walking away. From this constant control, these lies, the false love. I will not apologize for wanting a life of my own." Patricia's hand shook. "Avery, please. Think about your future. Your reputation." "Enough," I said firmly. My voice rang through the hallway, steady, unwavering. "My future is mine. My life is mine. If you can't accept that, then you can leave." I heard my phone vibrate in my pocket. I ignored it. My focus was on the two people who had dictated my choices for years, now powerless before me. At that moment, my neighbor, Mrs. Hamilton, appeared in the stairwell. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. She glanced at my parents' tense faces, then back at me. "Yes," I said, breathing evenly. "I just need to set some boundaries." Mrs. Hamilton nodded. She called over a friend, Officer Daniels, who had helped mediate neighborhood disputes before. He arrived quickly, assessing the situation calmly, asking for clarification. When I explained what had happened, the canceled wedding, the lies, the manipulations, he listened without judgment. "You have the right to protect yourself," he said finally. "Nobody can force you to accept this kind of treatment." Hearing those words, my chest loosened. For the first time in days, I felt truly seen, truly safe. My parents argued with him, trying to twist the story, but he remained impartial. Their protests fell flat against objective authority. Through the window, Lydia stood quietly, holding my coat. She caught my eye and smiled faintly. "I've got you," her expression said. Patricia's voice broke suddenly. "Am I not important enough to be trusted? To be loved?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "You are important," I whispered. "Once. But not anymore. Love doesn't come from control or lies." The rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, highlighting the droplets still clinging to the porch. I felt a sense of calm settle over me, quiet but absolute. After a few tense moments, my parents left. I closed the door softly behind them, letting it click shut like a promise. The hallway felt larger, lighter. The air no longer heavy with fear or obligation. I sank into Lydia's couch, my hands finally still. My chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Around me, the apartment hummed with life, small, ordinary sounds that now felt safe. The refrigerator, the distant siren, the faint hum of traffic. I realized something profound. I didn't need my parents' approval. I didn't need them to dictate my choices. I didn't need anyone who used love as a weapon. For the first time, I understood what genuine support felt like. I had allies, friends, neighbors, people who cared without strings, without expectations. People who would help me heal and let me live my life on my terms. That night, I went to sleep without the constant anxiety that had haunted me for years. For the first time, I could dream of a life that was truly mine, and it felt lighter than air. Somewhere, in the quiet of that night, I whispered to no one, "I am enough. My life is enough." And finally, for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The next morning, sunlight poured into Lydia's living room, warming the space in a way that felt almost miraculous. For the first time in days, I didn't wake with a knot in my chest. My hands rested on the coffee table, and for once, they weren't trembling. Lydia had gone to work early, leaving a note. "Breakfast is on the counter. You don't have to be alone today." On the table sat a small stack of banana bread slices, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a steaming cup of coffee. I smiled despite myself. These tiny gestures felt like more than food. They were proof that kindness existed outside my parents' manipulations. I decided to walk around the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, punctuated by birdsong and distant traffic. Mrs. Hamilton waved from her porch. "Morning, Avery. Thought you might like some freshly baked cookies," she called, handing over a small tin. I accepted them with a smile that was lighter than any I'd worn in years. The week unfolded like this. Neighbors bringing meals, coworkers checking in with texts and calls, Lydia always nearby, patient and supportive. I began to notice small things I'd never allowed myself to appreciate before. The scent of clean sheets, the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly brewed cup of tea, the sound of my own laughter when Lydia made a joke about her terrible parking skills. For the first time, I started tracking my finances openly. I opened a new bank account, transferred funds from accounts my parents still thought they controlled, and made a small budget. The numbers, once tools of anxiety, became instruments of freedom. Seeing my own savings grow, even slowly, felt empowering. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. He had been quietly coordinating with Rachel, confirming that everything my parents said had been lies. My heart warmed at the thought, but I waited. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet first before reconnecting. I also noticed changes in Lydia's son, Jamie, who often visited the apartment after school. He'd always been shy, quiet, but now he laughed more freely, danced around the living room while I brewed coffee, and confided little stories about school. His confidence reminded me of the person I was becoming, someone allowed to exist, not just perform. One evening, as I was organizing my apartment, I found a note slipped under my door. It read, "Avery, we don't know what you're going through, but you deserve better than lies. You're brave. A neighbor." I smiled and pinned it to the fridge. Every small gesture of support was like sunlight seeping through cracks in a wall I hadn't realized I'd built around myself. Even mundane tasks became symbols of my recovery. Cooking a simple meal for myself, folding laundry, watering the small plants I'd bought for the windowsill. Each act reminded me I was capable of nurturing life, including my own. By the end of the week, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning to thrive. The constant pressure of my parents' expectations had left me physically and emotionally drained, but now I felt energy returning to me in subtle waves. A laugh here, a smile there, small victories in budgeting or paying bills on time. That evening, Lydia and I shared a quiet dinner on the balcony. The city lights shimmered below us, and for the first time in years, the future felt open. I wasn't haunted by a canceled wedding, by lies, by control. I was surrounded by real people who chose to show up, who gave freely, without strings attached. I whispered to Lydia as we watched Jamie chase a sparrow across the courtyard. For once, the house feels bigger. And not just this apartment, everything feels bigger. Possibilities, hope, freedom. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You earned it, Avery." I smiled, letting the words sink in. The house wasn't just bigger. I was bigger. My life was bigger. And this time, no one could shrink it again. Morning light spilled across my new apartment, warming the wooden floors and the small potted plants I had arranged along the windowsill. I stretched, feeling my muscles relax in a way they hadn't in months. The apartment wasn't big, but it was mine. Every corner a reflection of choices I had made for myself. I poured a cup of coffee and smiled at the sight of the small breakfast table set neatly with Lydia's hand-me-down plates. Over the past week, I had carved out a rhythm that felt natural. Mornings with coffee and planning, afternoons for work, evenings for small joys. The city outside hummed softly, no one demanding, no one controlling. Jamie, Lydia's son, came bounding in, backpack slung over one shoulder, grinning. "Avery, look what I got for school today." He held up a drawing, colorful and bold, his best yet. I praised him, ruffling his hair, and watched as his face lit up. His growth reminded me of my own. Small steps, gradual progress, each one a quiet victory. I spent the day unpacking boxes, arranging my wardrobe, and setting up my art corner. For years, I had put aside my painting, my love of creating, because my parents decided my time should serve their vision, not mine. Now, I splashed color on canvas freely, letting the brush dance as it pleased. It felt like reclaiming pieces of my soul that had been suppressed for decades. Mid-afternoon, a message popped up from Ethan. I paused, staring at it. "Ethan, I'd love to see you." No expectations, just coffee and a chat. I typed back carefully. "I'd like that. Tomorrow afternoon." Even planning this meeting felt empowering, a choice, not a dictated path. Later, as I tended to my small balcony garden, I noticed new shoots pushing through the soil. Fresh beginnings, delicate and tenacious. Planting them had been my idea, my choice, and their growth mirrored my own, steady, patient, alive. The weekend arrived with gentle sunshine. Lydia and I decided to host a simple brunch for friends who had quietly supported me, neighbors, co-workers, and Rachel, Ethan's sister, who had become an unexpected ally. Laughter filled the apartment as we shared food, stories, and plans for the coming weeks. My chest felt light, unburdened by judgment or expectation. Even my old phone began to feel different. I blocked my parents' numbers, redirected their calls to voicemail. I wasn't angry anymore. I was protective of my boundaries, of my peace. Their reactions were no longer my responsibility. That evening, I journaled for the first time in months. I wrote about the wedding, the lies, and the freedom I was carving from the wreckage. Words poured out, unfiltered and honest. Each sentence was a stitch, sewing my life back together. Just before sunset, I stepped outside onto the balcony with a glass of water, looking out at the city skyline. The light caught the petals of the small flowers I had planted, making them glow faintly. I realized then that I hadn't just survived the past week. I had rebuilt. I had chosen myself over fear, joy over obligation, freedom over control. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe fully, laugh freely, and plan for tomorrow without anxiety. The routines, the small triumphs, the support of real people, it all became proof that I could thrive on my own. The day ended with a quiet ritual, watering my plants, straightening the art corner, and placing a single fresh bloom on the windowsill. It was symbolic, but deeply satisfying, a visible marker of renewal, of life reclaimed. I whispered to myself, softly but firmly, "This is my life, my choice, my happiness." And for the first time in years, I believed it completely. A year had passed since that stormy morning, the day I finally told my parents enough. My apartment felt like a home now, warm, personal, and alive with sunlight bouncing off the walls I had painted myself. Every corner held a memory of small victories, a plant thriving, a canvas drying, a photo of Jamie and me grinning after a spontaneous bike ride. I had returned to painting seriously, accepting freelance commissions that reminded me of my skill and independence. My mornings began with coffee, journaling, and quiet reflection, no one's approval required. One Saturday, I stepped out onto the balcony, stretching as the city's skyline glimmered in dawn light. Ethan arrived shortly after, holding a bouquet of daisies, simple and sincere. We had spent months reconnecting carefully, rebuilding trust and understanding, neither of us rushing, both of us healing. "Morning," he said, his voice calm but full of warmth. "Morning," I replied, smiling. The familiarity of his presence, no longer carried the weight of manipulation or lies. Just kindness, respect, and shared laughter. We spent the day cooking brunch together, our hands brushing occasionally, exchanging playful teasing. It felt ordinary, comforting, real, everything my parents' interference had tried to prevent. Later, as we ate on the balcony, Lydia and Jamie dropped by with freshly baked muffins, waving cheerfully. Their joy reminded me of the importance of a chosen family, people who show up, who care, who give freely. During the quiet moments, I reflected on the past year. My parents had called once, a brief voicemail laden with vague apologies, asking if I was doing okay. I hadn't returned it. I had healed, but I hadn't forgotten. Boundaries weren't about punishment. They were about preservation. And I had preserved my peace. I glanced at the flowers Ethan had brought, their petals bright against the early light. I realized how much I had changed. I no longer felt anxious, unsure, or controlled. I had learned that love was not conditional, that respect was not optional, and that my happiness was my responsibility, and no one else's. The apartment felt alive with possibility. My journal rested on the counter, open to a new page, inviting me to continue writing my story. A year ago, my wedding had been stolen, my trust violated. But today, I had created a life worth living, surrounded by people who chose to be part of it. I placed a fresh vase of daisies on the table, a symbol of resilience, renewal, and choice. The sun illuminated the petals, their shadows dancing lightly across the wall. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs fully for the first time in years. I whispered softly, almost to the flowers. Real family shows up. Boundaries keep you free. Ethan reached for my hand, and for a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the warmth and certainty sink in. It was peaceful. It was complete. I picked up my journal, jotting down one final line for the morning. Home. Outside, the city moved in its constant rhythm, indifferent yet familiar. But inside, my life was exactly as it should be, chosen, nurtured, and mine entirely. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to please anyone but myself. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need permission. And that, finally, was enough.